Hi! It always says, like, when I first go, it's, like, going live, loading, and then it goes, "You're live!" And I'm like, "Oh, okay." So, hi, what's up? Oh, I go live for a little bit on TikTok before I come over here, and the camera's so much better on there. Whatever, I'll get over it. This is what I look like. These are... Ah. That's okay. Okay, I'll deal with it. Hey, what's up? It's been a hot second. It's been how many weeks? 3? Yeah. So I didn't do it on the 6th or the 13th or the 20th. But I'm here now. I was in a play. It went well. My sword's right there. I got to use that sword. So yeah, I was in a play. And it took up all my time and all my energy. But I'm here now. So we're back. We're back in it. I was gonna audition for another play, and I am probably not going to do that. I'm not going to do that. I've already decided I'm not going to do that. Auditions are tomorrow. I'm not doing it. Okay. Well, yeah, so hopefully I'll be sticking around for a little bit. Hey, Grace. So what are we doing? Where do we leave off? I honestly could not remember. We finished reading Jade of the Orient Scene. That's done. And we're beginning with the walking tours, which is like, part in chapter 2 where they're going around trying to find their tokens. It's that scene, but without the tokens in the book. I don't know how far we're going to get because I haven't done this in a hot second, so I don't know how it's going to go. But I have like all of the little sections sectioned off. I wanted to go through the first half, and that would be 28 pages. So let's see if we can get through 28 pages tonight. That'd be sick. Let's try our best. But if not, I'm so sorry. Yeah, let's do it. I'm on page 541 in the It 2017, I don't know why I've specified It. The 2017 paperback book. Ignore my laundry in the back. Don't look at it. Yeah, let's jump right in. Chapter 11, Walking Tours. 1. Ben Hanscom makes a withdrawal. Richie Tozier got out of the cab at the three-way intersection of Kansas Street, Center Street, and Main Street, and Ben dismissed it at the top of Up Mile Hill. The driver was Bill's religious fella, but neither Richie nor Ben knew it. Dave had lapsed into a morose silence. Ben could have gone off with Richie, suppose, but it seemed better somehow that they all start off alone. He stood on the corner of Kansas Street and Daltrey Close, watching the cab pull back into traffic, hands stuffed deeply into his pockets, trying to get the lunch's hideous conclusion out of his mind. He couldn't do it. His thoughts kept returning to that black-gray flag crawling out of the fortune cookie on Bill's plate, its veined wings plastered to its back. He would try to divert his mind from this unhealthy image, think he had succeeded, only discover 5 minutes later that his mind was back at it. I'm trying to justify it somehow, he thought, meaning it not in the moral sense, but rather in the mathematical one. Buildings are built by observing certain natural laws. Natural laws may be expressed by equations. Equations must be justified. Where was the justification in what happened less than an hour ago? Let it alone, he said, not for the first time. You can't justify it, so let it alone. Very good advice. The problem was that he couldn't take it. He remembered that the day after he had seen the mummy on the iced-up canal, his life had gone on as usual. He had known that whatever it had been had come very close to getting him, but his life had gone on. He had attended school, taken an arithmetic test, visited the library when school was over, and eaten with his usual heartiness. He had simply incorporated the thing he had seen on the canal into his life, and if he had almost been killed by it, well, kids are always almost getting killed. They dashed across the streets without looking. They got horsing around the lake and suddenly realized that they had floated far past their depth on the rubber rafts and had to paddle back. They fell off monkey bars on their asses and out of the trees on their heads. Now, standing here in the faded drizzle in front of a trustworthy hardware store that had been a pawn shop in 1958, Frowdy Brothers, Ben recalled, the double windows always full of pistols and rifles and straight razors and guitars hung up by their necks like exotic animals. It occurred to him that kids were better at almost dying, and they were also better at incorporating the inexplicable into their lives. They believed implicitly in the invisible world. Miracles, both bright and dark, were to be taken into consideration. Oh, yes, most certainly. But they by no means stopped the world. A sudden upheaval of beauty or terror at 10 did not preclude an extra cheese dog or two out for lunch at noon. But when you grew up, all that changed. You no longer lay awake in your bed. Sure, something was crouching in the closet or scratching at the window, but when something did happen, something beyond rational explanation, the circuits overloaded. The axons in the dendrites got hot. You started to jitter and jive. You started to shake and rattle and roll. Your imagination started to hop and bop and do the funky chicken all over your nerves. You couldn't just incorporate what had happened into your life. You couldn't just incorporate what had happened into your life experience. It didn't digest. That's cool. It didn't digest. It didn't digest. It didn't digest. That's funny. Your mind kept coming back to it, pawing it lightly like a kitten with a ball of string, until eventually, of course, you either went crazy or got to a place where it was impossible for you to function. And if that happens, Ben thought, it's got me. Us. Cold. He started to walk up Kansas Street, not conscious of hiding any place in particular, and thought suddenly, what did we do with the silver dollar? He still couldn't remember. The silver dollar, Ben. Beverly saved your life with it. Yours, maybe all the others, and especially Bill's. It almost ripped my guts out before Beverly did. What? What did she do, and how was it able to work? She backed it off, and we all helped her, but how? A word came to him suddenly. A word that meant nothing at all, but which tightened his flesh. Chewed. He looked down at the sidewalk, and for a moment he saw the shape of a turtle chalked there, and the world seemed to swim before his eyes. He shut them tightly, and when he opened them, saw it was not a turtle, only a hopscotch grid half erased by the light rain. Chewed. What did that mean? I don't know, he said aloud, and when he looked around quickly to see if anyone had heard him talking to himself, he saw that he had turned off Kansas Street and onto Costello Avenue. At lunch, he had told the others that the Barrens were the only place in Derry where he felt happy as a kid, but that wasn't quite true, was it? There had been another place. Either accidentally or unconsciously, he had come to that other place. The Derry Public Library. He stood in front of it for a moment or two, hands still in his pockets. It hadn't changed. He admired its lines as much now as he had as a child. Like so many stone buildings that had been well designed, it succeeded in confounding the closely observing eye with contradictions. Its stony solidity was somehow balanced by the delicacy of its arches and slim columns. It looked both bank-safe, squat, and yet slim and clean. Well, it was slim as city buildings went, especially those erected around the turn of the century, and those windows, crisscrossed with narrow strips of iron, were graceful and rounded. These contradictions saved it from its ugliness, and he was not entirely surprised to feel a wave of love for that place. Nothing much had changed on Costello Avenue. Glancing along it, he could see the Derry Community House, and he found himself wondering if the Costello Avenue market was still there at the point where the avenue, which was semicircular, rejoined Kansas Street. He walked across the library lawn, barely noticing that his dress boots were getting wet, to have a look at the glassed-in passageway between the grown-ups' library and the children's library. It was also unchanged, and from here, standing just outside the bowed branches of a weeping willow tree, he could see people passing back and forth. Oh, I love this section. I love the connections with the passageway in the library. Favorite part. Not my favorite part. It's one of my favorite parts. The old delight flooded him, and he really forgot what had happened at the end of the reunion lunch for the first time. He could remember walking around to this very spot as a kid, only in the winter, plowing his way through snow that was almost hip-deep, and standing for as long as 15 minutes. It would come at dusk, he remembered, and again it was the contrast that drew him and held him there with the tips of his fingers going numb and snow melting inside his green gum rubber boots. It would be drawing down dark out where he was, the world going purple with early winter shadows, the sky the color of ashes in the east and embers in the west. It would be cold where he was, 10 degrees perhaps, and chillier than if the wind was blowing across the frozen barrens, as it so often did. But there, less than 40 yards from where he stood, people walked back and forth in their shirt sleeves. There, less than 40 yards from where he stood, was a tube-way of bright white light thrown by the overhead fluorescents. Like in the 1990 miniseries, the deadlights come through a pipe, but a tube-way of bright white light. Hold up. I don't think my highlighter works, actually. Oh, it does work a little bit. A tube-way of bright white light. And by the overhead fluorescents. Also, this little bit I like a lot. Also, this little bit back here I like a lot. Okay. Back to this, though. Little kids giggled together. High school sweethearts held hands, and if the librarian saw them, she would make them stop. It was somehow magical in a good way, that he had been too young to account for with such mundane things as electric power and oil heat. The magic was that glowing cylinder of life and light connecting those two dark buildings like a lifeline. The magic was in watching people walk through it across the dark snowfield, untouched by either the dark or the cold. It made them lovely and godlike. I love that passageway. Eventually, he would walk away, as he was doing now, and circle the building to the front door, as he was doing now. But he would always pause and look back once, as he was doing now, before the bulking stone shoulder of the adult library cut off into the sight line of the delicate umbilicus. Umbilicus. Umbilicus? Ruefully amused at the ache and nostalgia around his heart, Ben went up the steps of the door of the adult library, paused for a moment on the narrow veranda just inside the pillars, always so high and cool no matter how hot the day. Then he pulled open the iron-bound door with the book drop slot in it and went to the quiet. The forest of memory almost dizzied him for a moment as he stepped into the mild light of the hanging glass globes. The forest was not physical, not like a shot to the jaw or a slap. It was more akin to that queer feeling of time doubling back on itself that people call, for want of a better term, déjà vu. Ben had had the feeling before, but it had never struck him with such disorienting power. For the moment or two he stood inside the door, he felt literally lost in time, not really sure how old he was. Was he 38 or 11? Here was the same murmuring quiet, broken only by an occasional whisper, the faint thud of a librarian stamping books or overdue notices, the hushed riffle of newspaper or magazine pages being turned. He loved the quality of the light as much now as then. It slanted through the high windows, gray as a pigeon's wing on this rainy afternoon, a light that was somehow somnolent and dozy. He walked across the wide floor with its red and black linoleum pattern almost completely worn away, trying as he had always tried back then to hush the sound of his footfalls. The adult library rose up to a dome in the middle, and all sounds were magnified. He saw that the circular iron staircases leading to the stacks were still there, one on either side of the horseshoe-shaped main desk, but he also saw that a tiny cagework elevator had been added at some point in the 25 years since he and his mama had moved away. I wonder what Stephen King looked like at the Bangor because like Derry is based off of Bangor. This library is the Bangor Library. I wonder how Stephen King looked standing in that library studying it in order to describe it in this book. Imagine Stephen King just like walking in your library and just like looking around for a while. Anyways, it was something of a relief. It drove a wedge into that suffocating feeling of déjà vu. He felt like an interloper crossing the wide floor, a spy from another country. He kept expecting the librarian at the desk to raise her head, look at him, and then challenge him in clear, ringing tones that would shatter the concentration of every reader here and focus every eye upon him. You, yes, you, what are you doing here? You have no business here. You're from outside. You're from before. Go back from where you came from. Go back right now before I call the police. She did look up. A young girl, pretty, and for one absurd moment it seemed to Ben that the fantasy was really going to come true, and his heart rose into his throat as her pale blue eyes touched his. Then they passed on indifferently, and Ben found that he could walk again. If he was a spy, he hadn't been found out. He passed under the coil of one of the narrow and almost suicidally steep wrought iron staircases on his way to the corridor leading to the children's library, He just found out that one of his friends committed suicide, whatever, and was amused to realize only after he had done it that he had run down another old track of his childhood behavior. He had looked up, hoping, as he had hoped as a kid, to see a girl in a skirt coming down those steps. He could remember, glancing up there for no reason at all one day when he was 8 or 9 and looking right up the chino skirt of a pretty high school girl and seeing her clean pink underwear. We're still in Stephen King territory, don't you forget. As the sudden sunlight glint of Beverly Marsh's ankle bracelet had shot an arrow of something more primitive than simple love or affection through his heart on the last school day in 1958, so had the sight of a high school girl's panties affected him. He could remember sitting at a table in the children's library and thinking of that unexpected view for perhaps as long as 20 minutes. His cheeks and forehead hot, a book about the history of trains open and unread before him, his penis a hard little branch in his pants, a branch that had sunk its roots all the way up into his belly. He had fantasized the two of them married, living in a small house on the outskirts of town, indulging in pleasures he did not in the least understand. The feelings had passed off almost as suddenly as they had come. You know, this is making me feel like the sewer scene wasn't all just Beverly, okay? The feelings had passed off almost as suddenly as they had come, but he had never walked under the stairway again without glancing up. He hadn't ever seen anything else as interesting or affecting. Once a fat lady working her way down with ponderous care, but he had looked away from that sight hastily, feeling ashamed, like a violator. But the habit persisted. He had done it now as a grown man. He walked slowly down the glassed-in passageway, noticing other changes now. Yellow decals that said, "OPEC loves it when you waste energy, so save a watt," had been plastered over the switch plates. The framed pictures on the far wall when he entered the scaled-down world of blonde wood tables and small blonde wood chairs. This world where the drinking fountain was only 4 feet high were not of Dwight Eisenhower and Richard Nixon, but of Ronald Reagan and George Bush. Reagan, Ben recalled, had been host of GE Theater in the year that Ben had graduated from 5th grade, and George Bush would not have seen 30 yet. But that feeling of deja vu swept him again. He was helpless before it, and this time he felt the numb horror of a man who finally realizes, after half an hour of helpless splashing, that the shore is growing no closer and he is drowning. It was story hour, and over in the corner, a group of roughly a dozen little ones sat solemnly on their tiny chairs in a semicircle, listening. That reminds me that I have an NHS thing that I have to fill out about storytelling for little kids. I should probably do that. But not right now. I'm busy storytelling to 2 people online. "Who is that trip-trapping upon my bridge?" the library said. Oh, in the low, growling tones of the troll in the story. "Who is that trip-trapping upon my bridge?" And Ben thought, when she raises her head, I'll see that it's Mrs. Davies. Yes, it'll be Miss Davies, and she won't look a day older. But when she did raise her head, he saw a much younger woman than Miss Davies had ever been then. Some of the children covered their mouths and giggled, but others only watched her, their eyes reflecting the eternal fascination of the fairy story. Would the monster be bested, or would it feel? "It is I, Billy Goat Gruff, trip-trapping on your bridge," the librarian went on, and Ben, pale, walked past her. How can it be the same story? The very same story? Am I supposed to believe that's just coincidence? Because I don't. God damn it, I just don't. He bent to the drinking fountain, bending so far he felt like Richie doing one of his salami baloney routines. I ought to talk to someone, he thought. Panicked. Mike, Bill, someone. Something really stapling the past and present together here? I'm only imagining it. Because if I'm not sure I bargained for this much. He looked at the checkout desk, and his heart seemed to stop in his chest for a moment before beginning to race double time. The poster was simple, stark, and familiar. It said simply, "Remember the curfew, 7 p.m., Derry Police Department." I wonder if this actually is Pennywise that's, making this, seem so familiar, or if it's really just the fact that Derry doesn't change, you know? I'm making that note. No one who dies here ever really dies. Nothing happens in Derry ever dies. Just keeps reliving. Whole thing with like Mike and his father. It's like his father experienced racism. Mike is gonna experience the same racism. Like in that instant, it all seemed to come clear to him. It came in a grisly flash of light, and he realized that the vote he had taken was a joke. That the vote they had taken was a joke. There was no turning back, never had been. They were on a track as preordained as the memory track which had caused him to look up when he passed under the stairway leading up to the stacks. There was an echo here in Derry, a deadly echo, and all they could hope for was that echo could be changed enough in their favor to allow them to escape with their lives. Christ, he muttered, and scrubbed a palm of one cheek hard. Can I help you, sir? A voice at his elbow asked, and he jumped a little. It was a girl of perhaps 17, her dark blonde hair held back from her pretty high schooler's face with barrettes. A library assistant, of course. They'd had them in 1958, too. High school girls and boys who shelved books, showed kids how to use the card catalog, discussed book reports in school papers, helped bewildered scholars with their footnotes and bibliographies. The pay was a pittance, but there were always kids willing to do it. It was agreeable work. On the heels of this, reading the girl's pleasant but questioning look a little more closely, he remembered that he no longer really belonged here. He was a giant in the land of little people, an intruder. In the adults' library, he had felt uneasy about the possibility of being looked at or spoken to, but here it was something of a relief. For one thing, it proved he was still an adult, and the fact that the girl was clearly braless under her thin Western-style shirt was no more than relief also more relief than turn on. If proof that this was 1985 and not 1958 was indeed the clearly limbed points of her nipples against the cotton of her shirt, was it? No, thank you, he said, and then for no reason at all that he could understand, he heard himself add, I was looking for my son. Oh, what's his name? Maybe I've seen him, she smiled. I know most of the kids. His name is Ben Hanscom, he said, but I don't see him here. Tell me what he looks like and I'll give him a message, if there is one. Well, Ben said, uncomfortable now. I'm beginning to wish he never started this. He's on the stout side. He looks a bit like me. But it's no big deal, miss. If you see him, just tell him his dad popped by on his way home. I will, she said, and smiled. But the smile didn't reach her eyes. And Ben suddenly realized that she hadn't come over and spoken to him out of simple politeness and a wish to help. She happened to be a library assistant in the children's library in a town where 9 children had been slain over a span of 8 months. You see a strange man in the scaled-down world where adults rarely come to except to drop off their kids or pick them up. You're suspicious, of course. Thank you, he said. Gave her a smile he hoped was reassuring, and then got the hell out. He walked back through the corridor to the adults' library and went to the desk on an impulse he didn't understand. But of course, they were supposed to follow their impulses this afternoon, weren't they? Follow their impulses and see where they led. The nameplate on the circulation desk identified the pretty young librarian as Carol Danner. Behind her, Ben could see a door with a forest glass panel. Lettered on this was Michael Hanlon, head librarian. May I help you? Mrs. Danner asked. I think so, Ben said. That is, I hope so. I'd like to get a library card. Very good, she said, and took out a form. Are you a resident of Derry? Not presently. Home address, then? Rural Star Route 2, Hemingford Home, Nebraska. He paused for a moment, a little amused by her state, and then reeled off the zip code. 59341. Is this a joke, Mr. Hanscom? Wait, how does he know her name? How does she know his name? He hasn't given her his name. Hey! Is this Pennywise? Is this a joke, Mr. Hanscom? Not at all. Are you moving to Derry, then? I have no plans to, no. This is a long way to come to borrow books, isn't it? Don't they have libraries in Nebraska? It's kind of a sentimental thing, Ben said. He would have thought telling a stranger this would be embarrassing, but he found it wasn't. I grew up in Derry, you see. This is the first time I've been back since I was a kid. I've been walking around, seeing what's changed, what hasn't, and all at once it occurred to me that I spent about 10 years of my life here between the ages of 3 and 13, and I don't have a single thing to remember those years by. Not as much as a postcard. I had some silver dollars, but I lost one of them and gave the rest to a friend. I guess what I want is a souvenir of my childhood. It's late, but don't they say better late than ever? Carol Danner smiled, and the smile changed her pretty face into one that was beautiful. I think that's very sweet, she said. If you'd like to browse for 10 or 15 minutes, I'll have the card made up for you when you come back to the desk. Ben grinned a little. I guess there will be a fee, he said, out-of-towner and all. Did you have a card when you were a boy? I sure did, Ben smiled. Except for my friends. I guess that library card was the most important. What? Ben, why did you come up here? Oh no, Ben, would you come up here? A voice called suddenly, cutting across the library hush like a scalpel. He turned around, jumping guiltily the way people do when someone shouts in a library. He saw no one he knew, and he realized a moment later that no one had looked up or shown any sign of surprise or annoyance. The old men still read their copies of the Daily News, the Boston Globe, National Geographic, Time, Newsweek, U.S. News, and World Report. At the tables in the reference room, 2 high school girls still had their heads together over a stack of papers and a pile of file cards. Several browsers went on, looking through the books on the shelves marked Current Fiction, 7-Day Loan. An old man in a ridiculous driving cap, a cold pipe clenched between his teeth, went on leafing through a folio of Louis de Vargas's sketches. He turned back to the young woman who was looking at him, puzzled. Is anything wrong? No, Ben said, smiling. I thought I heard something. I guess I'm more jet-lagged than I thought. What were you saying? Well, actually, you were saying, but I was about to add that if you had a card when you were a resident, your name would still be in the files, she said. We keep everything on microfiche, micro-fiche now. Some change from when you were a kid here, I guess. Yes, he said. A lot of things have changed in Derry, but a lot of things that also seem to remain the same. Anyway, I can just look you up and give you a renewal card. No charge. That's great, Ben said. And before he could add thanks, the voice cut through the library's sacramental silence again. Louder now, ominously jolly. Come on up, Ben. Come on up, you fat little fuck. This is your life, Ben Hanscom. Ben cleared his throat. I appreciate it, he said. Don't mention it. She cocked her head at him. Has it gotten warm outside? A little, he said. Why? Ben Hanscom did it, the voice screamed. It was coming from above, coming from the stacks. Ben Hanscom killed the children. Get him! Grab him! Perspiring, she finished. Am I? He said idiotically. I'll have this made up right away, she said. Thank you. She headed for the old royal typewriter at the corner of her desk. Ben walked slowly away, his heart a thudding drum in his chest. Yes, he was sweating. He could feel it trickling down from his forehead, his armpits, matting the hair on his chest. He looked up and saw Pennywise the Clown standing at the top of the left-hand staircase looking down at him. His face was white with grease paint, his mouth bled lipstick and a killer's grin. There were empty sockets where his eyes should have been. He held a bunch of balloons in one hand and a book in the other. Not he, Ben thought. It. I'm standing here in the middle of the Derry Public Library's rotunda on a late spring afternoon in 1985. I am a grown man, and I am face to face with my childhood's greatest nightmare. I am face to face with it. Come on up, Pennywise, or come on up, Ben, Pennywise called down. I won't hurt you. I've got a book for you, a book and a balloon. Come on up. Ben opened his mouth to call back. You're insane if you think I'm going up there. And suddenly realized that if he did that, everyone here would be looking at him. Everyone here would be thinking, who is that crazy man? Oh, I know you can't answer, Pennywise called down and giggled. Almost fooled you there for a minute, didn't I? Pardon me, sir, do you have Prince Albert in a can? You do, better let the poor guy out. Pardon me, ma'am, is your refrigerator running? It is? Then hadn't you better go catch it? The clown on the landing threw its head back and forth and shrieked laughter. It roared and echoed in the dorm of the rotunda like a flight of black bats, and Ben was only able to keep from clapping his hands over his ears with a tremendous effort of will. Come on up, Ben, Pennywise called down. We'll talk! Neutral ground, what do you say? I'm not coming up there, Ben thought. When I finally come to you, you won't want to see me, I think. We're going to kill you. Wait, let me say the next part. The clown shrieked laughter again. Kill me? Kill me? You know the film... Have you guys seen the film theory video about how the losers can shine like in The Shining? This is proof, is it not? Ben just thought thoughts in his head, and Pennywise understood them. He heard them. They're shiners, and Pennywise is too. I'm gonna put it over here. I don't remember what the... Wait, can I put in the link of the video? Can you guys still see me? I'm gonna go off my other tab. If not, I'm so sorry. Film theory it. Okay. My copy. How do I copy it? I don't want to open it. Can you still see me? I don't know. Is everything still okay? Can I not copy the link? Oh, okay, copy link as. Oh, no. Whoa. Oh, no, I accidentally clicked on it. This guy stopped it. Don't worry. Don't you guys worry. Okay. This is the video I'm putting in the chat right now. Go watch that if you haven't yet. It's a film theory video about it and about the losers being able to shine. And this is proof right here. He didn't bring it up in the video, but I'm bringing it up now. Page 552 in it. That's proof, and I am marking it shining. Okay, anyways. The clown shrieked laughter again. Kill me? Kill me? And suddenly, horribly, the voice was Richie Tozier's voice, not his voice, precisely, but Richie Tozier doing his pickaninny voice. Don't kill me, mister. Oh. Back it up. Not doing the voice. This is a racist voice. He's doing a racist voice. Don't kill me, mister. I am a good N-word. Don't kill this here black boy haystack. Got it. I need to remember that is a bad voice. That's the bad voice. Okay. Then that shrieking laughter again. Trembling, white-faced, Ben walked across the echoing center of the adults' library. He felt that soon he would vomit. He stood in the front of a shelf of books and took one down at a random with a hand that trembled badly. His cold fingers flittered the pages. This is your one chance, Haystack, the voice called from behind and above him. Get out of town. Get out before it gets dark tonight. I'll be after you tonight. You and the others, you're too old to stop me, Ben. You're all too old. Too old to do anything but get yourselves killed. Get out, Ben. Do you want to see this tonight? He turned slowly, still holding the book in his icy hands. He didn't want to look, but it was as if there was an invisible hand under his chin, tilting his head up and up and up. The clown was gone. Dracula was standing at the top of the left-hand stairway. But it was no movie Dracula. It was not Bela Lugosi or Christopher Lee or Frank Langella or Francis Lederer or Reggie Nalder. An ancient man-thing with a face like a twisted root stood there. Its face was deadly pale, its eyes purplish red, the color of blood clots. Its mouth dropped open, revealing a mouthful of Gillette blue blades that had been set in the gums at angles. It was like looking into a deadly mirror maze where a single misstep could get you cut in half. Key wrench! It screamed, and its jaws snapped closed. Blood gouted from its mouth in a red-black flood. Chunks of its severed lips fell to the glowing white silk of its formal shirt and slid down the front, leaving trails of blood behind. Okay. What did Staniera see before he died? The vampire on the landing screamed down at him, laughing through the bloody hole of its mouth. Was it Prince Albert in a can? Was it Davy Crockett, king of the wild frontier? What did he see, Ben? Do you want to see it too? What did he see? What did he see? Then that shrieking laughter again, and Ben knew that he would scream now himself. Yes, there was no way to stop the scream. It was going to come. Blood was pattering down from the landing in a grisly shower. One drop had landed on the arthritis-sponged hand of an old man who was reading the Wall Street Journal. It was running down between his knuckles, unseen and unfelt. Ben hitched in breath, sure the scream would follow, unthinkable in the quiet of this softly drizzling spring afternoon, as shocking as the slash of a knife or a mouthful of razor blades. Instead, what came out in Instead, what came out in a shaky, uneven rush, spoken instead of screams, spoken low like a prayer, were these words. We made slugs out of it, of course. We made the silver dollars into silver slugs. The gentleman in the driving cab who had been pursuing the de Vargas sketches looked up sharply. Nonsense, he said. Now people did look up. Someone hissed shh at the old man in an annoyed voice. I'm sorry, Ben said in a low, trembling voice. He was faintly aware that his face was now running with sweat, and that his shirt was plastered to his body. I was thinking aloud. Nonsense, the old man repeated in a louder voice. Can't make silver bullets from silver dollars. Common misconception, pulp fiction. Problem is with specific gravity. Suddenly the woman, Mrs. Danner, was there. Mr. Brockhill, you'll have to be quiet, she said kindly enough. People are reading. Man's sick, Brockhill said abruptly and went back to his book. Give him an aspirin, Carol. Carol looked at Ben, and her face sharpened with concern. Are you ill, Mr. Hanscom? I know it's terribly impolite to say, but you look terrible. Ben said, I had Chinese food for lunch. I don't think it's agreed with me. If you want to lie down, there's a cot in Mr. Hanlon's office. You could... No. Thanks, but no. What he wanted was not to lie down, but to get the hell out of the Derry Public Library. He looked up to the landing. The clown was gone. The vampire was gone. But tied to the low wrought iron railing which surrounded the landing was a balloon. Written on its bulging skin were the words, "Have a good day. Tonight you die." I want that written somewhere. Wouldn't that be fun? Have a good day. Tonight you die. That's fun. I'm going to highlight that. That's interesting. Oh, that'd be fun on a shirt, wouldn't it? I guess it wouldn't really be fun. Anyways. I've got your library card, she said, putting a tentative hand on his arm. Do you still want it? Yes, thanks, Ben said. He drew a deep, shuddery breath. I'm very sorry about this. I just hope it isn't food poisoning, she said. Wouldn't work, Mr. Brockhill said without looking up from De Vargas or removing his dead pipe from the corner of his mouth. Device of pulp fiction, bullet wouldn't tumble. And speaking again with no foreknowledge that he was going to speak, Ben said, Slugs, not bullets. We realized almost right away that we couldn't make bullets. I mean, we were just kids. It was my idea to... Shh! Someone said again. Brockhill gave Ben a slightly startled look, seemed about to speak, then went back to the sketches. At the desk, Carol Danner handed him a small orange card with Derry Public Library stamped across the top. Bemused, Ben realized it was the first adult library card he'd owned in his whole life. The one he had as a kid had been canary yellow. Aw, canary yellow. Are you sure you don't want to lie down, Mr. Hanscom? I wonder what the color symbolization is between that orange and that yellow. That'd be interesting. I'm feeling a little bit better, thanks. Sure? He managed to smile. I'm sure. You do look a little better, she said, but she said it doubtfully, as if understanding that this was the proper thing to say, but not really believing it. Then she was holding a book under the microfilm gadget they use these days to record book loans, and Ben felt a touch of almost hysterical amusement. It's the book I grabbed off the shelf when the clown started doing its voice, that voice, remember that voice? That voice, he thought. She thought I wanted to borrow it. I've made my first withdrawal from the Derry Public Library in 25 years, and I don't even know what the book is. Is it Dracula? Anyways. Furthermore, I don't care. Just let me out of here, okay? That'll be enough. Thank you, he said, putting the book under his arm. You're more than welcome, Mr. Hanscom. Are you sure you wouldn't like an aspirin? Quite sure, he said, and then hesitated. You wouldn't, by chance, know what happened to Mrs. Starrett, would you? Barbara Starrett? She used to be the head of the children's library. She died, Carol Danner said. 3 years ago. It was a stroke, I understand. It was a great shame. She was relatively young, 58 or 9, I think. Mr. Hanlon closed the library for the day. Oh, Ben said, and felt a hollow place open in his heart. That's what happened when you got back to your used to be, as the song put it. The frosting on the cake was sweet, but the stuff underneath was bitter. People forgot you or died on you or lost their hair or teeth. In some cases, you found that they had lost their minds. Oh, it was great to be alive, boy howdy. I'm sorry, she said. You liked her, didn't you? All the kids liked Mrs. Starrett, Ben said. I was alarmed to realize that the tears were now very close. Are you... If she asks me if I'm all right one more time, I really am going to cry. I think... Blah, blah, blah. If she asks me if I'm all right one more time, I really am going to cry, I think, or scream, or something. He glanced at his watch and said, I really have to run. Thanks for being so nice. Have a nice day, Mr. Hanscom. Sure, because tonight I die. He tipped a finger her way and started back across the floor. Mr. Brockhill glanced up at him once, sharply and suspiciously. He looked up at the landing which topped the left-hand staircase. The balloon still floated there, tied by its string to the lacy wrought iron, but now the printing on its side read, I killed Barbara Starrett. Pennywise the Clown. That'd be cool on a shirt. Wouldn't that be cool on a shirt? I killed Barbara Starrett. Pennywise the Clown. Or just I killed Barbara Starrett. Wouldn't that be funny? Are you guys laughing? I'm laughing. I think these are funny shirt ideas. Can someone call up the merch team? I'll speak with them. He looked away. Like, enough of this, like, like, I'm a lover stuff. Like, if you want I killed Barbara Starrett on our shirts, at least I do. That'd be fun. I don't know if I'd ever wear it, though. People would think that I'm crazy. I am, but I can't let people think that. Anyways, back to the book. He looked away, feeling the pulse in his throat starting to run again. He let himself out and was startled by sunlight. The clouds overhead were coming unraveled, and a warm late May sun was shafting down, making the grass look impossibly green and lush. Ben felt something start to lift from his heart. It seemed to him that he had left some unsupportable burden behind in the library, and then he looked down at the book he had inadvertently withdrawn, and his teeth clamped together with sudden... Sorry, I just looked ahead. With sudden painful force. It was Bulldozer by Stephen W. Meader. One of the books he had withdrawn from the library on the day he dived into the barrens to get away from Henry Bowers and his friends. And speaking of Henry, the track of his engineer boot was still in the book's cover. Shaking, fumbling at the pages, he turned to the back. The library had gone over to a microfilm checkout system. He had seen that, but there was still a pocket in the back of this book with a card tucked into it. There was a name written on each line of the card, followed by the librarian's return date stamp. Looking at the card, Ben saw this. Name of borrower, returned by stamp date. Charles N. Brown returned May 14th, 58. David Hartwell, June 1st, 58. Joseph Brennan, June 17th, 58. And on the last line of the card, his own childish signature, written in heavy pencil strokes. Benjamin Hanscom, July 9th, 58. Stamped across this card, stamped across the book's flyleaf, stamped across the thickness of the pages, stamped again and again in smeary red ink that looked like blood, was one word, cancel. Oh, dear God, Ben murmured. He did not know what else to say. That seemed to cover the entire situation. Oh, dear God, dear God. He stood in the new sunlight, suddenly wondering what was happening to the others. So, it took me, 40 minutes to read 10 pages? 15 pages, 15. We still have, till the end of what I was planning on reading, we still have 13 to go. Are we down for another 40 minutes of this? I don't know what my mood is right now. I don't know why I'm so hyper. I'm, tired, but I'm, hyper. Yeah. Wait a second. Let me, section off the rest of this chapter. Oh, that's a section. That's a section right there. Don't mind me. Just wasting more time. There's a section right there. There's a section right there. Okay. So So by the end of, we still have math, 70 pages, 60 pages until the end of the chapter. So that means, what does that mean? That's only 20. That's 40. That's too many. This is 30. Or if we read this right now, and that would be 30, and that would be 20. So we should finish reading right now. Okay, let's do that. I'll try to go fast. I'll try to go so fast. One more thought, though. Why'd they change in the 1990 miniseries? They made the library scene with Richie. Why'd they do that? Why'd they change it? That's so weird. Anyways, 2. Eddie Kasprak makes a catch. Eddie got off the bus at the corner of Kansas Street and Cusseth Lane. Cusseth was a street that ran a quarter of a mile downhill before dead-ending abruptly where the crumbling earth sloped into the barrens. He had absolutely no idea why. I have to go somewhere in the morning. I'm fine. Okay, I'm fine. He had absolutely no idea why he had chosen this place to leave the bus. Cusseth Lane meant nothing to him, and he had known no one on this particular section of Kansas Street. But it seemed like the right place. That was all he knew. But at this point, it seemed to be enough. Beverly had climbed off the bus with a little wave at one of the lower Main Street stops. Mike had taken his car back to the library. Now, watching the small and somehow absurd Mercedes bus pull away, he wondered exactly what he was doing here, standing on an obscure street corner in an obscure town nearly 500 miles away from Myra, who was undoubtedly worried to tears about him. He felt an instant of almost painful vertigo, tucked his jacket pocket, and remembered that he had left his Dramamine back in the townhouse along with the rest of his pharmacopoeia. He had aspirin, though. He would no more have gone out sans aspirin than he would gone out sans pants. He chugged a couple dry and began to walk along Kansas Street, thinking vaguely that he might go to the public library or perhaps over to Costello Avenue. It was beginning to clear now, and he supposed he could even walk to West Broadway. Oh, this is the West Broadway scene. Oh, I hate the West Broadway scene. It took me like an hour to get through this when I was reading it on my own. Okay, anyways. It was beginning to clear now, and he supposed he could even walk over to West Broadway and admire the old Victorian houses that stood there along the only 2 really handsome residential blocks in Derry. He used to do that sometimes when he was a kid, just walk along West Broadway, sort of casual, but he was on his way to somewhere else. There was the Muellers near the corner of Witcham and West Broadway, a red house with turrets on either side and hedges in the front. The Muellers had a gardener that always looked at Eddie with suspicious eyes until he passed on his way. Then there was the Bowies' house, which was 4 down from the Muellers on the same side, one of the reasons he supposed that Greta Bowie and Sally Mueller had been such great friends in grammar school. It was green-shingled and also had turrets. While the turrets on the Muellers' house were squared off, those on the Bowies' house were capped with funny cone-shaped things that looked to Eddie like squatty dunce caps. In the summer, there was always lawn furniture on the side lawn, a table with a sporty yellow umbrella over it, wicker chairs, a rope hammock stretched between 2 trees. There was always a croquet game set up at the back, too. Eddie knew this, although he had never been invited over to Greta's house to play croquet. Wonder why, Eddie? You weren't friends. Walking by casually like he was on his way to somewhere else, Eddie would sometimes hear the click of the balls, laughter, groans as someone's ball was sent away. Once he had seen Greta herself, a lemonade in one hand, her croquet mallet in the other, looking slim and pretty beyond the words of all the poets. Even her sunburned shoulders seemed wonderfully pretty to Eddie Kasprak, who had been 9 at the time. I wonder if they're all going to talk about the girls they liked in these little chapters. Like, maybe that has something to do with the sewer scene. They all, like, just remember how they were obsessed with girls as kids. What's going on? It had going after a ball after it had been sent away. It had ricocheted off a tree and had thus brought Greta into Eddie's view. He fell in love with her a little that day, her shining blonde hair falling to the shoulders of her colette dress, which was a cool blue. She glanced around, and for a moment he had thought she had seen him, but that proved not to be so, because when he raised his hand to a timid hello, she did not raise hers in return, but only whacked her ball back into the rear lawn and then ran after it. He had walked on with no resentment at that unreturned hello. He genuinely believed she must not have seen him, or at the fact that he had never been invited to attend one of the Saturday afternoon croquet games. Why would a beautiful girl like Greta Bowie want to invite a kid like him? He was thin-chested, asthmatic, and had the face of a drowned water rat. Had the face of a drowned water rat! Oh my gosh, had the face of a drowned water rat! Steven! That poor kid! Doc Don Crazy was like, are you kidding me? Yeah, he thought, looking aimlessly back down Kansas Street. I should have gone over to West Broadway and looked at all those houses again. The Muellers, the Bowies, Dr. Hale's place. The Trackers. His thoughts broke off abruptly at that last name because, speak of the devil, here he was, standing in front of the Tracker Brothers truck depot. Still right here, Eddie said aloud and laughed. Son of a gun. The house on West Broadway, which belonged to Phil and Tony Tracker, a pair of lifelong bachelors, was probably the loveliest of the large houses on that street. A spotlessly white mid-Victorian with green lawns and great beds of flowers that rioted, in a neatly landscaped way, of course, all the spring and summer long. Their driveway was freshly sealed each fall, so that it always remained as black as a dark mirror. The slate shingles on the many slants of the roof were always a perfect mint green that almost exactly matched the lawn, and sometimes people stopped to take pictures of the mullioned windows, which were very old and quite remarkable. Any two men who bothered keeping a house so nice must be queer, as Eddie's mother had once said in a disgruntled sort of way, and Eddie hadn't dared ask for clarification. The truck depot was the exact opposite of the Tracker house on West Broadway. It was a low brick structure. The bricks were old and crumbling in places, their dirty orange hue shading to a sooty black at the building's footings. The windows were uniformly filthy except for a small circular place on one of the lower panes of the starter's office. This one pane had been kept spotlessly clean by kids before Eddie, and those who came after, because the starter kept a Playboy calendar over his desk. No boy came to play scratch baseball in the back without first stopping to wipe at the glass with his ball glove to examine that month's pinup. The depot was surrounded by a waste of gravel on three sides, long-distance haulers, Jimmy Pete's and Kensworth and Rio's, all painted the words Tracker Bros, Derry Newton, Providence, Hartford, New York, sometimes stood here in tangled, disordered profusion. Sometimes they were put together, and sometimes they were just cabs or body boxes standing silent on their rear wheels and support struts. Does Stephen King know that no one cares about this? I couldn't care less about the truck depot. The brothers kept their trucks out of the lot at the back of the building as much as they could, because they were both avid baseball fans and liked the boys to come and play. Phil Tracker drove freight himself, so the boys rarely saw him, but Tony Tracker, a man with huge slab arms and a gut to match, kept the books and the accounts, and Eddie, who never played, his mother would have killed him if she had heard he was playing baseball, racing around and getting dust in his delicate lungs, risking broken legs, concussions, and God alone knew what else. Got used to seeing him. He was a summer fixture, his voice as much a part of the game to Eddie than as Mel Allen's later became. Tony Tracker, large, but somehow ghost-like, his white shirt glimmering as summer dusk drew down and fireflies began to loom in the air with their lace of lights, yelling, "You got to get under the ball before you catch it, Red! You took your eyes off in the... You what? You took your eyes off in the ball, half-pint. You can't hit the goddamn thing if we ain't looking at it. Slide, horsefoot. You got the souls of them kids in that second baseman's face. He ain't never gonna tag you out." Never called any of them by name, Eddie remembered. It was always, "Hey, Red. Hey, Blondie. Hey, Four Eyes. Hey, half-pint." It was never a ball. Always a ball. A ball. It was never a bat, it was always something Tony Tracker called an ash handle, as in, you ain't never gonna hit that ball if you don't choke up in the ash handle, Horsefoot. Grinning, Eddie walked a little closer, and then the grin faded. The long brick building where orders had been processed, trucks repaired, and goods. Oh, no. I just I can't do this anymore. Look. I just pronounced good. Like good. Because I was thinking of Goob from Meet the Robinsons. But that says good. I said good. I'm gonna cry. Oh no. Oh no. What do I do now? I can't come back from this. I'm sorry. I'm like having a really hard time right now. I'm really upset. I guess I'll keep reading because I see Stan's name at the next page, so keep trucking on. The long brick building where orders had been processed, trucks repaired, and goods stored on the short-term basis was now dark and silent. Weeds were growing up through the gravel, and there were no trucks in either side yard, only a single box, its sides rusty and dull. Getting closer still, he saw that there was a realtors for sale sign in the window. Trackers out of business, he thought, and was surprised at the sadness the thought carried with it, as if someone had died. He was glad he hadn't walked over to West Broadway. If Tracker Brothers had gone under, Tracker Brothers, which had seemed eternal, what might have happened on that street he had liked so much to walk down as a kid? He realized uneasily that he didn't want to know. He didn't want to see Greta Bowie with gray in her hair, her hips and legs thickened with much sitting and much eating and much drinking. It was better, safer to just stay away. That's what we all should have done, just stayed away. We've got no business here. Coming back to where you grew up is like doing some crazy yoga trick, putting your feet in your own mouth and somehow swallowing yourself so there's nothing left. Can't be done, and any sane person ought to be fucking glad it can't. What do you suppose happened to Tony and Phil Tracker anyways? A heart attack for Tony, perhaps. He had been carrying maybe 75 extra pounds of meat on his bones. You had to watch out for what your heart might be up to. The poets might romance about broken hearts, and Barry Manilow sing about them. And that was fine by Eddie. He and Myra had every album Barry Manilow had ever recorded. But he himself preferred a good, solid EKG every year. Sure, Tony's heart had probably given it up as a bad job, and Phil? Given it up as a bad job. And Phil? Bad luck on the highway, maybe. Eddie, who made his living behind the wheel himself, or had these days he only drove the celebs and spent the rest of his time driving a desk, knew about bad luck on the highway. Old Phil might have jackknifed a rig somehow in New Hampshire, or in the Haynesville woods up north in Maine when the going was icy, or maybe he had lost his brakes on some long hill south of Derry, heading into Haven and a driving springtime rain. Those things, or any of the others you heard in those shit-kicking country songs about truck drivers who wore Stetson hats and had cheating on their minds. Driving a desk was sometimes lonely, but Eddie had been in the driver's seat himself more than once, his aspirator riding there with him on the dashboard, its trigger reflected ghostly in the windshield, and a bucketload of pills in the glove compartment. And he knew that real loneliness was a smeary red, the color of the taillights of the car ahead of you reflected on wet hot top in the driving rain. Oh shit, the time goes by, Eddie said in a singular, sighing sort of whisper. It was not even aware that he'd spoken aloud. Feeling both mellow and unhappy, a state more common to him than he would have believed, Eddie skirted the building. Gucci loafers crunching in the gravel. I'm sorry. He's wearing Gucci loafers. Oh my gosh. Eddie Kasprak, man. Oh my gosh. I mean, 1990, Dennis Christopher totally would, but James Ransone, he would never. Like, that Eddie Kasprak would never wear Gucci loafers in Derry, Maine, crunching on gravel. Crunching in the gravel to look. Do you think he died in those? I'll keep reading. How about that? To look at the lot where the baseball games had been played when he was a kid, when it seemed 19% of the world had been made up of kids. The lot wasn't much changed, but a look was enough to convince him that beyond the doubt that the games had stopped, a tradition that had simply died out at some point in the years between, for reasons of its own. In 1958, the diamond shape of the infield had been defined not by lined base paths, but in ruts made by running feet. They had no actual bases, but these boys who had played baseball here, boys who were all older than the losers, although Eddie remembered now that Stan Uris had sometimes played. Hey, his batting was only fair, but in the outfield he could run fast and had the reflexes of an angel. So he did play baseball. Oh, I'm so happy for him. Stanley, where are you? Come join us. You can't see him, but he's right here. Come join us. Good job. Good job. Such a good baseball player. Okay, anyways. Before, pieces of dirty canvas were always kept under the loading bay behind the long brick building to be ceremonially taken out when enough kids had drifted into the back lot to play ball, and just as ceremonially returned when the shades of evening had fallen thickly enough to end further play. Standing here now, so they all also remembered Santa in their little trips, or at least for these two, they have remembered him, which I like. Good job, Stanley. You have good friends. Standing here now, Eddie could see no trace of those rutted. Oh, we still have a little while to go. Only 6 pages. 6 pages. 6 pages. Standing here now, Eddie could see no trace of those rutted base paths. Weeds had grown up through the gravel in patchy profusion. Broken soda and beer bottles sprinkled here and there. In the old days, such shards of broken glass had been religiously removed. The only thing that was the same was the chain-link fence in the back of the lot, 12 feet high and as rusty as dried blood. It framed the sky in droves of diamond shapes. That was home run territory, Eddie thought, standing bemused with his hands in his pockets at the place where home plate had been 27 years ago. Over the fence and down into the barrens, they used to call it the automatic. He laughed out loud and looked around nervously, as if it were a ghost who had laughed out loud instead of a guy in $60 slacks. A guy as solid as... Get off with it, Eds, Richie's voice seemed to whisper. You ain't solid at all, and in the last few years the chuck's been few and far between, right? Yeah, right, Eddie said in a low voice and kicked a few loose stones away in a rattle. In truth, he had only seen 2 balls go over the fence at the back of the lot behind Tracker Brothers, both of them hit by the same kid, Belch Huggins. Belch had been comically big, already 6 feet tall at 12, weighing maybe 170. He got his nickname because he was able to articulate belches of amazing length and loudness at his best. Length and loudness. At his best, he sounded like a cross between a bullfrog and a cicada. Cicadas. Sorry, I need to stop talking. Sometimes, he would pat a hand rapidly across his open mouth while belching, emitting a sound like a hoarse Indian. Belch had been big, but not really fat, Eddie remembered now, but it was as if God had never really intended for a boy of 12 to attain such remarkable size. If he had not died that summer, he might have grown to be 6'6" or better. He might have learned along the way to maneuver his outsized body through a world of smaller denizens. He might even, Eddie thought, have learned gentleness. But at 12, he had been both clumsy and mean, not R-worded, but almost seeming so because all his body's actions seemed so amazingly graceless and lunging. He had none of Stanley's built-in rhythms. It was as if Belch's body did not talk to his brain at all, but existed in its own cosmos of slow thunder. Eddie could remember the evening a long, slow fly ball had been hit directly to Belch's position in the outfield. Belch didn't even have to move. He stood looking up, raised his glove in an almost aimless punching gesture, and instead of settling into his glove, the ball had struck him squarely on top of the head, producing a hollow bonk sound. It was as if the ball had been dropped from 3 stories high up onto the roof of a Ford sedan. It bounced up a good 4 feet and came down neatly into Belch's glove. An unfortunate kid named Owen Phillips had laughed at that bonking sound. Belch had walked over to him and kicked his ass so hard that the Phillips kid had run screaming for home with a hole in the seat of his pants. A hole. A hole in his pants. No one else laughed, at least not on the outside. Eddie supposed that if Richie Tozier had been there, he wouldn't have been able to help it, and Belch probably would have put him in the hospital. Belch was similarly slow at the plate. He was easy to strike out, and if he hit a grounder, even the most fumble-fingered infielders had no trouble throwing him out at first. But when he got all of one, it went a long, long way. The two balls Eddie had seen Belch hit over the fence had both been wonders. The first had been recovered, although more than a dozen boys had tramped back and forth over the steeply slanting slope which plunged down into the barrens looking for it. The second, however, had been recovered. The ball belonged to another sixth grader. Eddie could not now remember what his real name had been, only that the other kids called him Snuffy because he always had a cold. And he had been in use for most of the late spring and early summer of '58. As a result, it was no longer the nearly perfect spherical creation of white horsehide and red stitching that it had been when it came out of the box. It was scuffed, grass-stained, and cut in several places by its hundreds of bouncing trips over the gravel in the outfield. Its stitching was beginning to come unraveled in one place, and Eddie, who shagged foul balls when his asthma wasn't too bad, relishing every casual "thanks, kid" when he threw the balls back to the playing field. That's so cute. That's so cute. He knew that soon someone would produce a roll of black cat friction tape and embalm it so that they could get another week or so out of it. But before that day came, a seventh grader with the unlikely name of Stringer Dedham tossed what he fancied a change of speed pitch to Belch Huggins. Belch timed the pitch perfectly, the slow ones where, you could pardon the pun, just the speed, and hit Snuffy's elderly Spaulding so hard that the cover came right off and fluttered down just a few feet shy of second base like a big white moth. The ball itself had continued up and up into a gorgeous twilit sky. Twilit? It looks like it says twilit. No, twilit. Sky. Unraveling and unraveling as it went. Kids starting to follow its progress in dumb wonder. Up and over the chain link fence it went, still rising, and Eddie remembered Stringer Dedham said, "Holy shit," in a soft and awestruck voice as it went, riding a track into the sky, and they had all seen the unwinding string, and maybe even before it hit, 6 boys had been monkeying up that fence, and Eddie could remember Tony Tracker laughing in an amazed, loon-like way and crying, "That would have been out of the Yankee Stadium, do you hear me? That one would have been out of fucking Yankee Stadium!" It had been Peter Gordon who found the ball, not far from the stream the Losers Club would dam up less than 3 weeks later. What was left of it was not even 3 inches through the center. It was some kind of cockeyed miracle that the twine had never been broken. By unspoken consent, the boys had brought the remains of Snuffy's ball back to Tony Tracker, who examined it without saying a word, surrounded by boys who were likewise silent. Seen from a distance, the circle of boys standing around a tall man in a big sloping belly might have seemed almost religious in its intent, the veneration of a holy object. Belch Huggins had not even run around the bases. He only stood among the others like a boy who had no precise idea where he was. But Tony Tracker handed him that day was smaller than a tennis ball. Oh, my body hurts. Eddie, lost in these memories, walked from the place where home had been, across the pitcher's mound, only it had never been a mound, only a depression formed when the gravel had been scraped clean, and out onto shortstop country. He paused briefly, struck by silence, and Stanley would play shortstop, wouldn't he? He'd be shortstop. Yeah, he would. You'd be shortstop. Okay, anyways. He paused briefly, struck by silence, and strolled out to the chain-link fence. It was rustier than ever and overgrown by some sort of ugly climbing vine, but still there. Looking through it, he could see how the grind sloped away, aggressively green. I'm going to take a swig of water. Swig of water? Okay. The barrens were more jungle-like than ever, and for the first time he found himself wondering why a stretch of such tangled and virulent growth should have been called the barrens at all. It was many things, but barren was not one of them. Why not the wilderness or the jungle? Barrens. It had an ominous, almost sinister sound, but what it conjured up in the mind were not tangles of shrubs and trees so thick they had to fight for sun space. It called up pictures of sun dunes shifting away endlessly, or gray slate expanses of hard pan and desert. Barren. Mike had said earlier that they were all barren, and it seemed true enough. 7 of them, and not a kid among them. Even in these days of Planned Parenthood, that was bucking the odds. He looked through the rusty diamond shapes, hearing the faraway drone of cars on Kansas Street, the faraway trickle and rush of water down below. He could see the glints of it in the spring sunshine, like flashes of glass. The bamboo stands were still down there, looking unhealthily white, like patches of fungus in all the green. Beyond them, in the marshy stretches of ground bordering the Kenduskeag, there was supposed to have been quick mud. I spent the happiest times of my childhood down there in that mess, he thought, and shivered. He was about to turn away when something else caught his eye, a cement cylinder with a heavy steel cap on the top. Morlock holes, Ben used to call them, laughing with his mouth, but not quite laughing with his eyes. If you went over to one, it would stand maybe waist high on you if you were a kid, and you would see the words Dairy Department of Public Works stamped in raised metal in a semicircle. And you could hear a humming noise from deep inside, some sort of machinery. Morlock holes. That's where we went. In August, in the end, we went into one of Ben's Morlock holes, into the sewers. But after a while, they weren't sewers anymore. They were what? Patrick Hockstetter was down there. Before it took him, Beverly saw him doing something bad. It made her laugh, but she knew it was bad. Something to do with Henry Bowers, wasn't it? Yes, I think so, and he turned away suddenly and started back towards the abandoned depot, not wanting to look down as the Barrens anymore, not liking the thoughts they conjured up. He wanted to be home with Myra. He didn't want to be here. Catch, kid! He turned towards the sound of the voice, and here came some sort of ball, right over the fence and toward him. It struck the gravel and bounced. Eddie stuck out his hand and caught it. In his unthinking reflex, the catch was so neat it was almost elegant. He looked down at what was in his hand, and everything inside him went cool and loose. Once it had been a baseball. Now it was only a string-wrapped sphere because the cover had been knocked off. He could see the string trailing away, and went over the top of the fence like a strand of spiderweb and disappeared into the barrens. Oh, Jesus, he thought. Oh, Jesus, it's here. It's here with me now. Come on and play, Eddie. The voice on the other side of the fence said, and Eddie realized with a fainting sort of horror that it was the voice of Belch Huggins, who had been murdered in the tunnels under Derry in August of 1958. And now here was Belch himself, struggling up and over the bank on the other side of the fence. He wore a pinstriped New York Yankees baseball uniform that was flecked with bits of autumn leaves and smeared with green. He was Belch, but he was also the leper, the creature hideously arisen from long years in a wet grave. The flesh on his heavy face hung in putrescent strings and runners. One eye socket was empty. Things squirmed in his hair. He wore a moss-lined baseball glove in one hand. He poked the rotting fingers of his right hand through the diamonds of the chain-link fence, and when he curled them, Eddie heard the dreadful squirting sound, which he thought might drive him mad. That one would have been out of Yankee Stadium, Belch said, and grinned. A toad, noxiously white and squirming, dropped from his mouth and tumbled to the ground. Do you hear me? That one would have been out of fucking Yankee Stadium. And by the way, Eddie, do you want a blowjob? I'll do it for a dime. Hell, I'll do it for free. Belch's face changed. The jelly-like bulb of nose fell in, revealing 2 raw red channels that Eddie had seen in his dreams. His hair coarsened and drew back from his temples, turned cobweb white. The rotting skin on his forehead split open, revealing white bone covered with a mucousy substance, like the bleared lens of a searchlight. Belch was gone. The thing which had been under the porch on 29 Niebolt Street was here now. Bobby blows me for a dime, it crooned, beginning to climb the fence. It left little pieces of its flesh in the diamond shapes of crisscrossing wires made. The fence jingled and rattled with its weight. When it touched the climbing vine-like weeds, they turned black. He will do it any time. 15 cents for overtime. Eddie tried to scream. Nothing but a dry, senseless squeak came out of him. His lungs felt like the world's oldest ocarinas. Ocarinas. I don't know what that word is. He looked down at the ball in his hands, and suddenly blood began to sweat up from between the wrapped strings. It pattered to the gravel and splashed on his loafers. Oh, not the Gucci loafers. He threw it down and took 2 lurching stagger steps backwards, his eyes bulging from his face, rubbing his hands on the front of his shirt. The leper had reached the top of the fence. Its head swayed in silhouette against the sky, a nightmare shape like a bloated Halloween jack-o'-lantern. Its tongue lolled out, 4 feet long, perhaps 6. It twined its way down the fence like a snake from a leper's grinning mouth. There 1 second, gone the next. It did not fade like a ghost in a movie, it simply winked out of existence. But Eddie heard a sound which confirmed its essential solidity, a pop sound, like a cork blowing out of a champagne bottle. It was the sound of air rushing in to fill the place where the leper had been. He turned and began to run, but before he had gone 10 feet, 4 stiff shapes flew out from the shadows under the loading bay of the abandoned brick depot. He thought at first they were bats, and he screamed and covered his head. Then he saw that they were squares of canvas, the squares of canvas that had been bases when the big kids played here. They whirled and twirled in the still air. He had to duck to avoid one of them. They settled in their accustomed places all at once, kicking up little puffs of grit. Home, first, second, third. Car just honked. Scared me. Gasping, his breath short in his throat, Eddie ran past home plate, his lips drawn back, his face as white as cottage cheese. Whack! The sound of a bat hitting a phantom ball. And then Eddie stopped, the strength going out of his legs, a groan passing his lips. The ground was bulging in a straight line from home to first, as if a gigantic gopher was tunneling rapidly just below the surface of the ground. Gravel rolled off to either side. The shape under the earth reached the base, and the canvas flipped up into the air. It went up so hard and fast it made a popping sound like a shoe shine kid makes when he's feeling good and pops the rag. The ground began to ridge between first and second, racing and racing. Second base flew into the air with a similar popping sound that had barely settled back before the shape under the ground had reached third and was racing for home. Home plate flew up as well. Before it could come down, the thing had popped out of the ground like some grisly party favor. And the thing was Tony Tracker, his face a skull to which a few blackened chunks of flesh still clung. His white shirt a mess of rotted linen strings. He poked out of the earth at home plate from the waist up, swaying back and forth like a grotesque worm. Don't matter how much you choke up on that axe handle, Tony Tracker said in a gritty, grinding voice. Exposed teeth grinned in lunatic chumminess. Don't matter, Wheezy. We'll get you. You and your friends will have a ball. Eddie shrieked and staggered away. There was a hand on his shoulder. He shrank from it. The hand tightened for a moment, then gave away. He turned. It was Greta Bowie. She was dead. Half of her face was gone. Maggots crawled in the churned red meat that was left. She held a green balloon in one hand. Car crash, the recognizable half her mouth said, and grinned. The grin caused an unspeakable ripping sound, and Eddie could see raw tendons moving like terrible straps. I was 18, Eddie. Drunk and done up in reds. Your friends are here, Eddie. Eddie backed away from her, his hands held up in front of his face. She walked toward him. Blood had splashed, then dried on her legs in long splotches. She was wearing penny loafers. And now beyond her, he saw the ultimate horror. Patrick Hawksetter was shambling toward him across the outfield. He, too, was wearing a New York Yankees uniform. Eddie ran. Greta clutched him again, tearing his shirt and spilling some terrible liquid down the back of his collar. Tony Tracker was pulling himself out of the man-sized gopher run. Patrick Hawksetter stumbled and staggered. Eddie ran, not knowing where he was finding the breath to run, but running somehow anyway. And as he ran, he saw words floating in front of him, the words that had been printed on the side of the green balloon Greta Bowie had been holding. Asthma medicine causes lung cancer. Compliments of Center Street Drug. Eddie ran. He ran and ran, and at some point he collapsed in a dead faint near McCarran Park, and some kids saw him and steered clear of him because he looked like a wino to them. Like, he might have some kind of weird disease for all they knew. He might even be the killer they talked about. He might even be the killer, and they talked about reporting to the police, but in the end, they didn't. And that's it. We're done. Woo! We did it! Yay! Woo! Yay! 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 Was Ben's balloon a specific color? Because Eddie's was green. Was Ben's balloon a specific color? They all have specific colors. Where is his balloon? Did not say. It doesn't say what color it is. Whatever. Okay. Well, that's where we're leaving off today. Not tomorrow. Next week, we're gonna get to Beverly's chapter and Richie's chapter. And if you guys are familiar with some of the stuff that goes down in this book, you know that shit goes down on page 580 with Beverly and her father. I'm looking at it right now. Whew! Get excited. I have been, what's the word? Dreading this day since I started reading this, and it's coming next Saturday. Get freaking pumped, or some sick stuff's going down in this next part. So we're going to be heavily applying those content warnings. Get ready, be prepared. I'm so sorry you have to deal with this, but we'll get through it together. That was all we're reading tonight, though. So I will see you next week. Well, I won't see you. You'll see me next week at the same time, same place, same station. Good night. I'm kidding. But yeah, you'll see me here, same time, 10 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Same channel right here. Same weird mood, probably. I don't know. We'll see. Hope you guys have a great night, though. Stay safe out there. Pretty please. And I'll see you next time. Thank you for spending your night with me. Bye-bye.